Hey guys, tonight we're heading way back to the dusty banks of the Nile about 3,000 years ago. The air is still cool, the sky a sleepy lavender, and the city of Thebes murmurs awake under a low blanket of morning mist. You're lying on a woven reed mat in a small mud brick house, your limbs stiff from another night of hard sleep. Outside, someone's already clanging about with a water jar, and inside your mouth, well, it's a whole other desert. Your tongue is dry, your teeth feel fuzzy, and there's a suspicious crunch when you bite down on what might be leftover sand from yesterday's lunch. That's not unheard of. Grain in Egypt gets ground with stone, and sometimes a little grit tags along for the ride. You sit up slowly, blinking away sleep and sand alike, and stretch until your joints crack like old papyrus scrolls. The roof beams creak above you. Your cat has somehow taken over your pillow again. And as you trudge outside to splash water on your face from a cool clay basin, you start to think, maybe the gods weren't joking about divine cleanliness. See, hygiene's a big deal in ancient Egypt, not just because it's hot, dusty, and absolutely crawling with bugs, but because cleanliness is spiritual. A clean body is a holy body. And your breath? That might be carrying more than just last night's lentils. It might be a reflection of your moral standing. No pressure or anything. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and the local time in the comments. I love seeing where in the world you're all drifting off from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You slip on a simple linen wrap and make your way through the narrow alley outside your home. The stone under your feet is already warm. The Nile glitters at a distance. You squint at the horizon and wonder whether your neighbor, the one who thinks his goats are prophets, is already out brushing his teeth with a palm frond and strong opinions. As you chew on a stale fig for breakfast, you find yourself absent-mindedly rubbing a finger over your front teeth. They ache, a dull throb that's as familiar as the creak in your left knee. You're not alone. Most Egyptians, even the wealthy, suffer from dental problems. All that sand, all those tough grains. And yet, you're lucky to be born in a culture that actually cares about oral hygiene, weirdly ahead of its time. Historians still argue whether the ancient Egyptians were the first to develop something like toothpaste, or whether they just got so fed up with chewing on gravel, the dentist threw the kitchen sink at the problem. But one thing's for sure, brushing your teeth in ancient Egypt is not optional. It's sacred, social, and not always comfortable. You sigh, grab your reed toothbrush, and prepare to face the day. Spoiler, it's going to taste like hooves. You shuffle toward the shrine tucked into the corner of your home, past the clay jars and sleeping cat, because no respectable Egyptian starts their day without a nod to the afterlife, a little incense, a quick prayer, and maybe a biscuit for the gods. It's all part of the daily flow. And as your thoughts drift back to your aching molar, you wonder if the gods might take pity on your poor, crumbling enamel. See, to the ancient Egyptians, the body wasn't just a temporary vessel. It was a lifelong companion, one you'd be dragging with you into the field of reeds. And if you thought bad breath was a nuisance in this world, imagine showing up in the afterlife with a mouthful of blackened stumps and that slightly fishy odor you get from old lentils and regret. Not a good look. The Book of the Dead doesn't specifically list "thou shalt floss," but cleanliness was woven into Egyptian spirituality. They mummified bodies with incredible care, every tooth, every toenail in its place. Priests bathed up to 4 times a day. If your mouth was a mess, people might wonder what other sins you were hiding. Some scholars argue that oral hygiene had divine connotations, a way to stay pure before the gods. Others think it was just practical, because even your enemies won't smite you if you smell like lotus blossoms. And then there were the tomb inscriptions, those oddly poetic tributes to dental pain. One old kingdom letter mentions a noble complaining of the ache that gnaws my jaw, like the crocodile beneath the reeds. You wince in solidarity. Toothaches, it seems, were the great equalizer of the ancient world. Even the mighty Ramses II had abscesses so severe, modern CT scans show infections burrowed into his jaw. Yikes. You pause, leaning against a sun-warmed wall, and consider your own options. There's always a visit to the SW, the local healer/dentist priest hybrid. Or you could try one of the homemade remedies floating around the neighborhood. Your cousin swears by sycamore sap. Your neighbor recommends pressing onion paste into your gums while reciting the names of 3 ibis gods. That same neighbor also tried to sell you anti-cavity crocodile scales last week, so maybe grain of salt. Still, you have to do something. You have chores to run, temple errands to fulfill, and it's hard to haggle in the marketplace when you're wincing mid-sentence. You remember hearing someone say that having bad teeth meant you'd have trouble speaking the true name of the gods in the afterlife. Whether that's true or just a bedtime threat from overly dramatic grandmothers is still up for debate. But in a world where people buried amulets on their tongues, it's not the wildest idea. You take another deep breath, reach for the worn satchel hanging by your door, and mutter a sleepy curse at the sky. Today, you're going to fix your mouth, or at least survive breakfast without crying. The field of reeds can wait, but your molar can't. You duck into the shadow of a tamarisk tree as the morning sun begins to climb, casting long, syrupy rays that stretch across Thebes like lazy fingers. Birds chirp half-heartedly overhead, and the air smells faintly of crushed date pits and warm dust. You fish around in your satchel for the one thing that might give your teeth a fighting chance today: your homemade toothpaste blend. Technically, it's more of a tooth powder. The ancient Egyptians didn't have tubes or even paste. What they had were bowls of dry, pulverized ingredients carefully measured by hand and stored in lidded jars, each labeled with neat pictographic hieroglyphs like ox hoof, ground fine, or burnt eggshell, extra smoky. You open your jar and grimace at the smell, something between a campfire and a barn floor. The main ingredient is indeed crushed ox hoof. Ground down to a gritty powder, it's valued for its abrasiveness, a natural exfoliant for the enamel, or what's left of it. You add a pinch of burned eggshells for calcium, a dash of pumice stone, and, if you're feeling fancy, a sprig of fresh mint, or a drop of myrrh oil. Historians still argue whether this blend actually helped or just sanded your teeth into submission. Some modern dentists flinch at the abrasiveness. Others admit that, for its time, it was surprisingly effective. Sure, it could wear down your enamel and leave your gums screaming, but it definitely scrubbed off the grime. And the taste? Well, you probably wouldn't find it on a modern toothpaste commercial unless they were marketing to goats. You scoop a small mound into your palm and add a splash of water from your gourd. The mixture turns into a paste, clumpy, gray, slightly steaming in the heat. You apply it with a finger, massaging it over your teeth with a practiced rhythm. It's coarse, chalky, and definitely not minty fresh. You gag once, then power through. You're an Egyptian. You've survived sandstorms, camel caravans, and your uncle's storytelling. You can handle this. As you scrub, you remember that old market tale about the courtier who brushed so obsessively he filed his front teeth into tiny pyramids. Supposedly, he did it to flatter the pharaoh, who found geometry very comforting. Historians remain divided on whether this was true or just another case of overachieving sycophant syndrome. Once your scrubbing is done, you rinse with a little natron water. Natron, that chalky, soda-rich salt harvested from dry lake beds, is another all-purpose Egyptian wonder. Used in mummification, laundry, deodorant, and, why not, mouthwash. Your tongue curls at the sharp taste, but afterward your mouth feels, well, not clean exactly, but less cursed. You glance at your reflection in a polished copper mirror. Your teeth look slightly less yellow in the right light, maybe even passable for temple duty. You'll still avoid smiling too wide, especially near the nobles. They don't appreciate peasant chic. Tucking away your kit, you sigh, wondering how something as simple as a tooth cleaning ritual can feel both holy and mildly traumatic. You suppose that's Egypt in a nutshell. You wipe your hands on your tunic, stretch your jaw, and set off toward the swan. After all, there's only so much hoof powder can fix. You arrive at the SWNW's home just as the sun clears the rooftops. The building, like most in Thebes, is squat and rectangular, with pale mud brick walls and an open courtyard where bundles of herbs dry in the breeze. The scent of anise and henna wafts toward you, a welcome distraction from your aching jaw. You hesitate at the entrance, part reverence, part dread. The SWNW, or healer, wears many hats: priest, physician, occasional dentist, and part-time exorcist, depending on who you ask. Inside, he's hunched over a scroll, muttering under his breath. You clear your throat, and he looks up with a practiced squint, one eyebrow raised in the way of people who've seen more toothaches than sunrises. He beckons you to sit on a low stool. Around you, copper tools gleam in the light: scrapers, forceps, tiny chisels shaped like angry birds. Most were likely hammered into shape by temple smiths, carefully blessed and shockingly cold. A few still bear faint red stains. You try not to think about that. Bad molar? He asks, already poking at your face. You wince. He hums knowingly, then begins a chant. Not quite a prayer, not quite a poem, meant to soothe both body and spirit. Egyptians believed in treating illness as both a physical affliction and a spiritual imbalance. Sometimes a toothache was caused by a worm burrowing inside the tooth. Other times, by offending a minor household deity who didn't like the way you trimmed your beard. Historians still debate whether these toothworms were metaphors or if Egyptians genuinely believed in squirming dental squatters. Either way, it explains why some dental treatments included honey for stickiness, beer for morale, or opium poppy extracts for actual pain relief, thankfully. You brace as he inspects your tooth. No anesthesia, just deep breathing and the knowledge that the gods are watching. He scrapes gently with a copper hook, muttering another incantation as he works. It's not pleasant, but it beats letting the tooth rot. Probably. He pauses to dab your gums with crushed lotus and what he claims is divine clay. You don't ask. You've learned not to ask. A nearby scroll shows a diagram of a human head with wide, terrified eyes and an arrow pointing at the mouth. Label something like, "Here be dragons." Then comes the rinse. He offers you a cup of beer with a splash of vinegar, a common antiseptic mix that doubles as distraction. You swish, trying not to gag. You wonder if this is what high priests drink to build character. Finally, he presses a small amulet into your palm, a hippo-shaped charm said to ward off pain. You thank him, your mouth numb and tingling, and hand over a few cloves and a sprig of fennel as payment. Real money is nice, but in the world of village healers, spices speak louder than coins. Outside, the air feels lighter. Your tooth still aches, but now it feels managed, honored even. Maybe the gods approve. You head off, chewing very, very carefully. You wander back toward the marketplace, weaving between donkey carts and linen vendors, one hand gingerly cradling your jaw. The pain has dulled to a background throb, still there, but manageable, like a complaining ant who's settled into her second glass of pomegranate wine. The Theban streets are buzzing now. Sandals slap the stone, barters rise and fall in melodic argument, and somewhere a lute plucks out a sleepy rhythm. You follow the scent of baking bread, laced with the sharper tang of dried fish, until you reach a familiar stall. The bread woman greets you with a grin that reveals exactly 2 teeth, each leaning in opposite directions like old friends refusing to let go. You buy a flat round of Emma wheat bread, soft in the middle and scorched at the edges. It's dense and nutty, and yes, a little sandy. Not metaphorically, actually sandy. You chew carefully, not because of your sore tooth, but because grit is just part of the experience. The ancient Egyptians used grinding stones that wore down with time, letting fine particles of quartz slip into the dough. Over years, those tiny grains did what wars couldn't. They eroded teeth into sad little stubs. Historians agree that even the upper class, those with gold leaf and personal barge access, had dental problems thanks to all that sand in their bread. And it wasn't just bread. Beer mash, often strained poorly, could carry bits of barley husk and ash. Your daily diet was basically a desert disguised as a meal. To fight this, some households tried filtering flour through linen. Others soaked bread in beer to soften it, creating a sort of fermented pudding/soup that tasted better than it looked. Maybe, possibly, you nibble at your own loaf and think, with a mouth this sore, even pudding might be too ambitious today. You pass a stall selling remedies, bundles of dried herbs, sticks of cinnamon, and, displayed with suspicious pride, a jar labeled gazelle dung paste for teeth and courage. You squint. The seller waves a hand dramatically and claims it's endorsed by high priests and even a hippo goddess. You suspect he just made that up. Still, some treatments were legit. Myrrh and frankincense had antiseptic properties. Licorice root sweetened breath and soothed gums. Even mint, crushed and added to tooth powders, could cut through bad smells with surprising elegance. But as for that dung paste, let's just say historians are still arguing whether it was medicinal or just the world's earliest prank. You move on. At a small stall near the edge of the market, you pause. An old man sells toothbrushes, or what passes for them, chewed sticks, usually from the arak tree. You pick one up, the end frayed like a miniature broom. Egyptians didn't use bristles. They softened these twigs and rubbed them across their teeth, relying on the natural antibacterial qualities of the wood. You buy one for later. Your molar complains again, and you whisper a quiet threat to it. Behave, or next time, it's gazelle paste. A few vendors chuckle as you walk past. You're not sure if they heard the joke or just recognized the look of a fellow dental survivor. The sun hovers overhead now, flattening shadows and turning the city to gold. You walk slowly, savoring the rare feeling of a breeze as it snakes through the alleys, tugging at your tunic. Somewhere behind you, a street performer juggles clay jars and chants a hymn to Thoth, god of wisdom, and, presumably, strategic molar maintenance. You drift toward the temple district, where the truly elite get their teeth examined, if not preserved, by temple-affiliated physicians. These aren't your average street WIW. These are the scholars with scrolls, access to imported resins, and actual bronze tools. Fancy. You spot one now, robed in linen so white it practically hums. He stands beneath a painted colonnade, lecturing a circle of apprentices. You sneak closer, pretending to admire a fresco, and catch snippets of the lesson. Tooth extraction should never be your first choice, unless the patient is loud. The students laugh, nervously. One scroll on the table nearby contains diagrams of teeth in profile. Another shows a wide open mouth beside a set of herbs: fenugreek, acacia resin, and some kind of root labeled with a glyph that might mean stubborn pain or possibly bite of Ra. Historians still debate the translation. These temple healers had access to knowledge that common folk could only dream of. Not just how to clean teeth, but how to ease pain with willow bark, a natural form of salicin, the precursor to aspirin, or how to mix soothing paste from barley and cow's milk. Yes, milk. Egyptians weren't big dairy drinkers, but they certainly weren't above using it in medicinal goop. You lean in, listening as the temple healer describes the importance of balance in the body. Too much heat in the mouth, he says, can cause swelling. The cure? Chew cool papyrus soaked in beer overnight, then rinse with honey and vinegar. One apprentice raises a hand. But what if that doesn't work? The healer pauses. Then we call it divine punishment and prescribe a week of silence. You smirk. You've met that kind of doctor before. Near the edge of the courtyard, you spot a cabinet lined with ivory. Inside are ancient dental tools: picks, spatulas, tiny spoons for mixing powders, and even a few golden implements. Not necessarily for use. Some were votive offerings, buried with the dead so they wouldn't suffer phantom toothaches in the afterlife. Imagine crossing the duat with a wisdom tooth acting up. One such tool is shaped like a beetle, the sacred scarab. Its function is unclear. Was it a pick? A tongue depressor? A conversation starter? Scholars still argue with surprising passion over its purpose. You linger until the students begin packing up. One of them, barely older than you, offers a sympathetic smile and slips you a small wax tablet. Pressed into it is a recipe for a numbing balm made from goose fat, onion, and dried lotus. Good for sore teeth, she whispers, then adds, tastes worse than it sounds. You nod your thanks and tuck it away. You're building a toolkit now, one weird ingredient at a time. You wander away from the temples and into the quieter residential quarters of Thebes, where narrow streets wind like lazy snakes between mud brick homes. Children chase each other barefoot, dodging laundry lines and stray cats with surprising coordination. The hum of daily life here is gentler, less commerce, more clatter of pots and distant singing. You breathe in the scent of lentils cooking over coals and wonder if they too get stuck in molars. A young boy sits outside his doorway, diligently chewing on a piece of frayed palm stem. His mother watches approvingly, keeps the teeth clean, she tells you without looking up from her weaving. You nod. You've seen this before. Miswak sticks, the original zero-waste toothbrush. The fibers are mildly abrasive, the sap gently antiseptic. Add a dab of natron, a kind of ancient baking soda, and you've got yourself a full-on dental hygiene routine. Historians still argue whether this technique spread from Egypt or arrived via trade with Nubia or the Levant. What's certain is that chewing sticks like these would remain in use for thousands of years, even today, in some corners of the world. Inside the woman's home, you catch sight of a small niche holding jars of crushed minerals. Not cosmetics, she explains, but dental powders. You've heard of these: crushed ox hoof, burnt eggshells, powdered pumice. Mix them with vinegar or beer, and you get a paste somewhere between restorative and regret. The ox hoof blend, in particular, is said to strengthen the teeth, or at least intimidate them into submission. One recipe even calls for a bit of goose grease, perhaps for texture, or maybe it was just handy. Hard to say. Scrolls don't always clarify intent. You're offered a taste. You politely decline. Back outside, an older man overhears your conversation and laughs. You want real dental protection, he says. Eat raw onions every morning. Chases away disease in your neighbors. He's not wrong. Onions were prized for their cleansing properties, though not necessarily their social ones. Workers building the pyramids were said to consume onions, garlic, and radishes in vast quantities. Part vitamin supplement, part team-building exercise through shared halitosis. You pause by a public well, watching a group of women crush herbs in a stone mortar. Someone is making a balm, perhaps for burns, perhaps for gums. The ingredients change, but the process remains ancient and rhythmic. The sound of pestle against stone is oddly soothing, like a heartbeat under layers of dust and time. A little girl tugs your sleeve and hands you a painted bead on a string. For your tooth, she whispers, to keep the demons away. You nod gravely. In a world where pain has no clear source, sometimes a talisman works better than a tincture. And just like that, you've added another layer to your understanding of ancient dental care. It's not just about what they did, it's how they lived with it, how they coped, traded recipes, whispered charms, and found comfort in ritual and rhythm. You tuck the bead into your pouch and smile, carefully. The sun begins its long descent over Thebes, and the light softens to a lazy bronze. You head toward the necropolis, not to visit the dead, but to pass through one of the quietest parts of the city. It's strange how peaceful it feels near tombs, less sorrowful than serene, like even the air walks on tiptoe. A procession winds past you, priests in leopard skins, mourners humming a dirge, and one elaborately painted coffin carried high on shoulders. Death in ancient Egypt wasn't the end. It was just another kind of journey. But as you watch the group disappear down the hill, you wonder, what did they do about dental pain when death wasn't near, but not far either? You recall something from an earlier conversation about tooth-related rituals performed before burial. In some mummies, archaeologists have found linen stuffed into the mouth to cushion broken teeth, or smeared with resin to seal the mouth shut in comfort. A few even had fake teeth inserted, not porcelain, wood, ivory, or shaped stone. Whether they served a spiritual or cosmetic purpose, historians still debate. A breeze stirs the dust, and you follow it to a small, shaded workshop. Inside, a man sits carving an ivory tooth. He doesn't look up. For the afterlife, he says simply. You nod. It's beautiful, polished and smooth, shaped to fit into a jaw, long since crumbled. You glance at the shelves and spot something rarer, a copper dental probe, delicately curved, likely ceremonial, though it could have been used in extreme cases. Temple doctors may have attempted primitive extractions, perhaps with herbs to dull the pain and strong assistance to hold the patient still. Was it successful? Sometimes. Was it quiet? Definitely not. To lighten the mood, the artisan tells you a joke. Why did the pharaoh visit the dentist? You shrug. Because his pyramid scheme fell apart. You groan audibly, and the artisan beams with pride. Further down the path, you meet a priestess tending to a shrine of Sekhmet, the lion-headed goddess of plague and healing. She burns frankincense and murmurs a prayer for balance between life and decay, health and rot. You kneel politely, and she blesses your jaw with a smudge of scented oil for strength of tooth and silence of ache. The sun brushes the horizon now, casting long blue shadows. As you walk back into the city, the distant laughter of children mixes with the drone of insects and the occasional bray of a donkey who's clearly had a rough day. The air cools, and your tooth, well, it still hurts, but it feels somehow lighter now, as if, in learning how ancient Egyptians dealt with it, with twigs, ox hoof, and stubborn optimism, you've joined a club older than pyramids. You pass a man sitting on a rooftop, plucking a harp. He doesn't sing, just plays. A lilting melody that sounds like water, wind, and maybe just a hint of clove. You stop beneath his perch, close your eyes, and listen. Evening spreads across the city like a thick velvet blanket. You walk slowly now, footsteps quiet against packed earth. As the scent of night jasmine rises to greet you, torches flicker along the main avenue, casting shadows that dance across painted walls. And just when you think the day is winding down, you hear it. A low buzz of conversation, laughter, and the clinking of ceramic jars. You found yourself at a small evening gathering, a kind of sleepy Egyptian salon. It's a modest courtyard, lit by oil lamps and surrounded by neighbors reclining on woven mats. Bread, figs, and beer make their rounds. You're welcomed with the same casual warmth reserved for stray cats and distant cousins. You take a seat and, naturally, the topic of teeth comes up again. Apparently, your curiosity has made its way around town. An elderly woman launches into a story about her grandfather's molar, so rotten it whistled when he yawned. She describes in vivid detail how a traveling healer cured it by stuffing it with mashed dates and beeswax, then sealing it shut with a prayer and a bit of gold foil. Historians still debate whether such fillings were practical or symbolic, but traces of beeswax dental fillings have been found in some ancient skulls. Practicality or piety? The line is always blurry here. Another man claims his cousin once used crocodile fat to dull his gum pain. It didn't work, he adds, but the smell kept his wife away long enough for him to recover. You chuckle. This mix of medicine and mischief is as Egyptian as lotus flowers and elaborate eyeliner. You sip beer, brewed from emmer wheat, murky, a bit sour, but oddly soothing. The kind of drink you imagine dulls not just toothaches, but the bite of a long week. Someone passes you a small clay amulet in the shape of a lion's tooth. Good luck, they say, though whether it's for pain or protection, no one's quite sure. Across the courtyard, a young boy pokes at a pot of thick paste. You recognize the smell: natron, honey, and crushed fennel. A classic mouth rinse, strong enough to wake the dead, or at least clear the breath. He dips his fingers in and touches them to his gums with exaggerated care, then pretends to swoon dramatically. The group laughs. You realize now how central teeth are to daily life, not just in discomfort, but in stories, rituals, and remedies passed down like heirlooms. There's comfort in that, strangely. Pain may be universal, but so is the human urge to soften it with routine, with laughter, with herbs and superstition. As the evening winds down, someone plucks a simple flute and begins to play a slow, sleepy tune. You lean back against a warm wall, staring up at stars that blink just above the rooftops. Somewhere deep inside, your tooth still throbs, but it's quieter now, outnumbered by songs, by company, by the quiet persistence of ancient remedies that somehow still linger. Night has fully settled by the time you leave the gathering. The cool air brushes your skin, offering a welcome contrast to the warmth that still lingers in your chest from the evening's camaraderie. You make your way back through the quiet streets of Thebes, where the glow from distant lamps casts the city in a peaceful, dreamlike haze. The moon is rising high now, casting long, ghostly shadows across the walls of crumbling stone. You think about how, just a few hours ago, you were standing at the edge of the marketplace, feeling the slow throb of your aching tooth. It doesn't seem so important anymore, not when you consider all the strange and beautiful ways the ancient Egyptians had found to manage their own pains, real or imagined. As you walk, you pass the great temple to Amun, its towering columns silhouetted against the sky. For a moment, you pause, letting the weight of ancient history settle around you. This is a place where gods and kings once walked, where rituals and secrets were performed under the watchful eyes of priests and scribes. And yet, in the end, even the gods couldn't escape a toothache. You chuckle softly, shaking your head. There's a certain comfort in knowing that, despite all the grandeur of this ancient world, its people were just as prone to everyday discomforts as you are. Whether you're a peasant with a bad tooth or a pharaoh with a shiny crown, it seems we all find ourselves searching for some kind of remedy. You stop by the Nile's edge for a moment, letting the soft lap of water soothe your mind. The river stretches out before you, vast and timeless, much like the rituals of the past. In that moment, you feel the connection to everything around you, the people, the customs, the history that's been etched into the earth beneath your feet. The Nile, like their remedies, has a way of enduring through time, calming the restless soul, and offering a quiet reminder that some things, like pain or healing, are as old as the world itself. As you turn back toward your home, the soft creak of the wooden door welcomes you. You step inside, the familiar scent of clay and dried herbs filling the air. The flickering light of a single oil lamp casts warm shadows on the walls, and as you sink into your bed, you realize your toothache is a little quieter now. Perhaps it's the balm of history, or maybe it's the quiet comfort of knowing that even the ancients had their own ways of dealing with pain. You close your eyes, your mind wandering back to that playful evening, to the herb-filled courtyards and the stories of those who came before. And just before you drift off to sleep, you can almost hear the sound of a harp in the distance, playing a lullaby for a world that's always been full of both light and shadow.